The gunshot echoed across the endless wheat fields as Penelope Hart ducked behind the swaying golden stalks, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. The year was 1876, and she had never imagined her journey west would lead her to this moment, running for her life across the Kansas prairie, miles from civilization with no horse and dwindling strength. Penelope's dress, once a respectable pale blue calico, was now torn and stained with dirt and sweat. 3 days had passed since she'd escaped the stagecoach robbery that had left her fellow travelers dead. 3 days of hiding, running, and barely surviving on rainwater collected in leaves and a few berries she'd recognized as safe to eat. The outlaws were still searching for her, the only witness to their crimes. The midsummer sun beat down mercilessly. Penelope's throat felt like sandpaper, her lips cracked and bleeding. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as she pushed forward through the endless wheat. She'd been a schoolteacher back in Boston, respected and comfortable. Now she was nothing but prey, hunted across this beautiful but unforgiving landscape. Just a little farther, she whispered to herself, though she had no idea where farther led. The distant outline of what might be structures wavered on the horizon. A homestead, perhaps. Or just another mirage brought on by her increasing dehydration. Penelope stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully as she caught her foot in a hidden furrow. She crashed forward into the wheat, the golden stalks parting and then closing above her like water. For a moment she lay still, the earth cool against her feverish cheek. Maybe it would be easier to just stay here, to close her eyes and surrender to the exhaustion that had been stalking her as relentlessly as the outlaws themselves. She thought of her parents back in Massachusetts, who would never know what happened to their only daughter. She thought of the teaching position waiting for her in the small frontier town of Redemption Creek. So many unfulfilled promises, so many unlived days. With a groan, Penelope tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and gave way. The black spots in her vision expanded, merging together. The last thing she saw was the wheat swaying gently above her, as if waving goodbye. Lucas Blackwell spotted the disturbance in his wheat field from atop his chestnut gelding, Thunder. At 28, he'd spent the last 5 years building his farm on this stretch of Kansas prairie, and he knew every inch of his land. The strange ripple in the even sea of gold caught his practiced eye immediately. "Whoa, boy," he murmured to Thunder, pulling gently on the reins. He sat motionless for a moment, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn leather hat. Another man might have thought it was just the wind, but Lucas knew better. Something or someone was moving through his wheat. In these parts, strangers often meant trouble. 3 years since the end of the war, and outlaws still roamed the territories, taking advantage of the scattered law enforcement. Lucas had fought enough battles in his life, first in the war between the states, then to establish his homestead against drought, disease, and occasional raids. He wasn't looking for another fight, but he wouldn't shy away if trouble came calling. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip as he guided Thunder forward, following the disturbed pattern in the wheat. As he drew closer, the movement stopped. Lucas dismounted, tethering Thunder to a lone cottonwood that stood like a sentinel at the field's edge. Moving silently through the wheat, steps measured and cautious, Lucas approached the spot where he'd last seen movement. He pushed aside the golden stalks and froze at what he found. A woman lay unconscious among the broken wheat. Her dress was tattered, her face dirty and sunburned, but even in this state, Lucas could see she was young and, beneath the grime and exhaustion, beautiful. Her chestnut hair had mostly escaped what had once been a neat bun, and her hands, though scratched and dirty, showed the delicate fingers of someone unaccustomed to hard labor. Lucas knelt beside her, immediately checking for a pulse. It was there, but weak and rapid. Her skin burned with fever and her lips were cracked from dehydration. Whoever she was in serious trouble. "Miss," he called, lightly tapping her cheek. "Miss, can you hear me?" No response. Lucas looked around, wondering if she was alone or if whoever had brought her to this state might be nearby. He saw no one, heard nothing but the whisper of wind through wheat and the distant call of a meadowlark. Decision made, Lucas carefully gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, alarmingly so. He carried her to Thunder, then paused, considering the logistics. She was in no condition to ride, even with support. "Sorry, boy," he told the horse, "but we're going to have to do this differently." With careful movements, Lucas managed to position the woman over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. It wasn't dignified, but it was the safest way to transport her the mile back to his homestead. He took Thunder's reins in his free hand and began the walk home, the unconscious woman a concerning weight across his shoulders. Lucas's homestead came into view after 20 minutes of steady walking. It wasn't grand, but it was solid, a main cabin built of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, a small barn, and a corral for the horses. A vegetable garden flourished to one side, protected by a fence to keep out rabbits and deer. It had taken years of hard work to build this place, but Lucas felt a surge of pride each time he returned to it. Today, however, his thoughts were entirely focused on the woman he carried. He brought her directly into the cabin, laying her gently on his own bed. Thunder could wait a few minutes before being unsaddled. Lucas quickly fetched water from the pump outside, returning with a basin and clean cloths. With careful hands, he began to clean the dirt from her face, noting the fine features beneath the grime. Who was she? What had happened to bring her, alone and half dead, to his wheat field? Lucas had learned long ago that the frontier was full of stories, some inspiring, some heartbreaking. Whatever this woman's story was, it had clearly taken a dangerous turn. As he dampened her cracked lips with a wet cloth, her eyelids fluttered. For a brief moment, she looked at him with eyes the color of summer sky before they rolled back and she slipped into unconsciousness again. Lucas continued his ministrations, cleaning her face and hands, removing her torn boots to examine swollen, blistered feet. He pulled a chair up beside the bed and prepared for a long night. Whoever she was, whatever trouble she was in, she was now under his protection. On the frontier, that was how things worked. You helped those in need and asked questions later. Outside, the sun began its slow descent, painting the endless wheat fields in hues of amber and gold. Penelope drifted through layers of consciousness, fragments of reality mixing with fever dreams. Sometimes she was back on the stagecoach, laughing with Mrs. Whitmore about Eastern fashions. Other times she was running through endless wheat, the sounds of pursuit always just behind her. Occasionally, she was in an unfamiliar room, with a man's deep voice speaking words she couldn't quite grasp and strong hands holding a cup to her lips. When she finally woke fully, sunlight was streaming through a window covered with simple muslin curtains. Penelope lay still, trying to orient herself. She was in a real bed with clean sheets that smelled of sunshine. The room around her was spare but tidy. Log walls hung with a few tools and what looked like a cavalry saber, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a small table with a lamp. This wasn't the hotel in Redemption Creek where she'd been headed. It wasn't anywhere she recognized. Memory flooded back the stagecoach, the robbery, the running. Penelope tried to sit up but fell back with a groan as her body protested, every muscle screaming in pain. The sound must have carried because heavy footsteps approached and the door swung open. Penelope instinctively pulled the blanket higher, her heart racing as a man entered the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple cotton shirt, worn denim pants and suspenders. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with strong features softened somewhat by concerned gray eyes. Dark hair, a bit too long, curled at the nape of his neck. He wasn't handsome in the refined way of Boston gentlemen, but there was something compelling in his rugged appearance. "You're awake," he said, his voice deep but gentle, like he was talking to a spooked horse. "That's good, been worried about you." Penelope tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She managed only a raspy croak. "Here," the man said, coming to her side and helping her sit up slightly. He held a cup of water to her lips. "Small sips. You've been without proper water for some time, I think." Penelope obeyed, the cool water like heaven on her parched throat. After a few sips, she found her voice. Where am I? Who are you? My name's Lucas Blackwell. This is my homestead, about 20 miles west of Redemption Creek. Found you collapsed in my wheat field 3 days ago. 3 days. Penelope's eyes widened. I've been unconscious for 3 days, Lucas nodded, setting the cup down on the bedside table. In and out. Fever had a strong hold on you, broke last night finally. Penelope tried to process this information. 3 days lost, 3 days during which this stranger had apparently been caring for her. Thank you, she said finally. I'm Penelope Hart. I was traveling to Redemption Creek to take a position as the schoolteacher there. Lucas's expression shifted, a flash of recognition in his eyes. The stagecoach from Topeka, the one that was robbed, Penelope nodded, her throat tightening as memories flooded back. Yes, I was the only one who. She couldn't finish the sentence. I heard about it. Marshall rode through 2 days ago, said they found the coach and… Lucas paused, clearly not wanting to distress her. They thought everyone was accounted for, didn't know there was a survivor. I hid, Penelope whispered, shame washing over her. When they started shooting, I ran into the tall grass. I should have done something, helped somehow, but I just ran. And lived, Lucas said firmly. Nothing you could have done against armed outlaws except what you did. You survived. That's not something to be ashamed of. Penelope wasn't convinced, but she was too exhausted to argue. The men who did it, they're still out there. They were looking for me afterward. I heard them saying they needed to find the woman in the blue dress. Lucas's jaw tightened. Well, they won't find you here. Not many folks even know this homestead exists, and those who do aren't the type to gossip about who might be staying here. Penelope studied him, trying to determine if she could trust this man. He'd saved her life, cared for her while she was unconscious, actions that spoke to his character. But she'd left Boston partly to escape the unwanted attentions of a man who'd seemed respectable on the surface. Mr. Blackwell, Lucas, he corrected. Lucas, she amended. I'm very grateful for your help, but I need to get to Redemption Creek as soon as possible. They're expecting me, and after what happened. You're in no condition to travel, Lucas said, his tone gentle but firm. Fever's only just broken, and you're weak as a newborn foal. Marshall's been notified about the robbery. The school board in Redemption Creek will understand a delay, especially once they learn you're the sole survivor. Penelope wanted to protest, but she knew he was right. She could barely sit up, let alone travel. How long? She asked instead. At least a week, Lucas replied. Maybe more. We'll see how quickly you regain your strength. He stood, looking slightly uncomfortable. I've been sleeping in the barn while you've had the bed. Nothing improper, I assure you. Despite everything, Penelope felt a flush rise to her cheeks. I've imposed on you terribly. Lucas shook his head. Not at all. Out here we help each other. It's how we survive. He moved toward the door. You should rest more. I'll bring some broth later if you feel up to eating. After he left, Penelope sank back against the pillows, her mind whirling with all that had happened. She was alive thanks to this stranger, but she was also completely dependent on him, at least for now. And somewhere out there, the men who had killed everyone else on that stagecoach were still looking for her. For the first time since leaving Boston, Penelope wondered if coming west had been a terrible mistake. In the following days, Penelope's strength gradually returned. Lucas proved to be an attentive but respectful caretaker, bringing her meals, helping her to the chair by the window when she felt strong enough to sit up, and leaving her alone when she needed rest. By the 4th day of her conscious recovery, Penelope was able to move around the cabin on her own, though she tired quickly. She insisted on helping with small tasks, folding laundry, peeling potatoes for dinner, mending a torn shirt of Lucas's that she found in a basket by the hearth. It was little enough repayment for his kindness, but it made her feel less helpless. Lucas, she discovered, was a man of few words but thoughtful actions. He brought her books from his small collection when he noticed her looking bored. He picked wildflowers from the prairie and placed them in a jar by her bedside. When she expressed interest in his homestead, he described it in detail, painting a picture of the life he'd built here over the past 5 years. Came west after the war, he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, Penelope wrapped in a quilt despite the summer warmth, still prone to chills after her fever. Fought for the Union, saw enough killing to last a lifetime, wanted something different, something I built instead of destroyed. And you chose here, this empty stretch of prairie? Penelope asked, genuinely curious. It was beautiful in its way, but so isolated compared to the busy streets of Boston. Lucas nodded, his gaze on the dancing flames. Land was available through the Homestead Act, soil's good. And there's a peace here you can't find in cities. Sky so big it makes your troubles seem small by comparison. Penelope understood that sentiment. Even in her short time here, she'd been awed by the vastness of the Kansas sky, especially at night when stars crowded the darkness in numbers she'd never imagined possible. "What about family?" she asked. "Do you have anyone back east?" A shadow crossed Lucas's face. "Had a younger brother. Lost him at Antietam. Parents passed before the war. There was a girl once, but..." He trailed off, then shrugged. She couldn't see herself as a farmer's wife on the frontier, can't blame her for that. Penelope thought about the life Lucas led here, the hard work, the isolation, the beauty of it, and yes, the danger too. It would take a special kind of woman to embrace such a life. "And you?" Lucas asked, turning the conversation away from himself. "What brings a Boston schoolteacher all the way to Redemption Creek?" Penelope hesitated. She told him the basic facts, her teaching position, her journey west, but not the real reason she'd left Boston. Something about the quiet sincerity in Lucas's gray eyes made her want to tell the truth. "I was running away," she admitted. "Or perhaps running toward something new, I'm not entirely sure which." Lucas waited, not pressing but clearly willing to listen if she wanted to continue. "There was a man," Penelope said finally, "the son of a prominent family in Boston. My father works for his father's company. Frederick began calling on me last year, and at first I was flattered. He was handsome, educated, wealthy, everything a sensible young woman should want." She stared into the fire, remembering. But there was something wrong about him. The way he spoke to servants when he thought no one important was listening. The way he would grip my arm too tightly if I disagreed with him. Small things, but they made me uneasy. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. When I tried to end our courtship, he became insistent. Said we were meant to be together, that I just needed guidance to see it. My parents were no help, they were thrilled at the connection to his family. Then I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in Redemption Creek. It seemed like Providence. "And he let you go?" Lucas asked. Penelope gave a small, bitter laugh. "Not exactly. He followed me to the train station, made a scene, said if I left, he would ensure my father lost his position. I got on the train anyway. I don't know if he followed through on his threat." "Brave," Lucas commented. "Foolish, perhaps," Penelope countered. "I'd never been west of Philadelphia before this journey. I had no idea what I was getting into." "Still brave," Lucas insisted. "Facing the unknown takes more courage than staying in a bad situation you understand." They fell silent, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Penelope felt a strange comfort in having shared her story with Lucas. He hadn't judged or offered unwanted advice. He'd simply listened. "It's getting late," Lucas said finally, rising from his chair. "You should rest. You're healing well, but sleep is still the best medicine." Penelope nodded, suddenly aware of the fatigue weighing on her. "Thank you, Lucas, not just for the care, but for listening." He gave her a small smile, the expression transforming his serious face. "Same to you. Don't get many chances for conversation out here." After he left for the barn where he'd been sleeping, Penelope lay in bed thinking about Lucas Blackwell. He was nothing like the men she'd known in Boston, no polished manners or clever conversation. But there was a solid honesty to him, a quiet strength that she found increasingly compelling. She reminded herself that in a few days, once she was stronger, she would continue to Redemption Creek and take up the teaching position waiting for her there. This interlude at Lucas's homestead was just that, a temporary pause in her journey, not a destination. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, Penelope couldn't help wondering what it would be like to stay. The next morning, Penelope woke feeling stronger than she had since the ordeal began. Sunlight streamed through the window, and the distant sound of chopping wood told her Lucas was already at his chores. She rose and dressed in the simple calico dress Lucas had procured for her wear, She wasn't entirely sure, but she suspected it might have belonged to a neighbor or perhaps even the girl he'd mentioned, the one who couldn't see herself as a farmer's wife. Her original blue dress had been beyond repair, torn and stained beyond recognition. Moving to the washstand, Penelope splashed water on her face and attempted to bring order to her hair with the simple comb Lucas had provided. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror was different from the one she remembered from Boston Thinner, more tanned despite her days of recovery indoors, with a new wariness in the eyes. The West had already changed her, and she'd barely begun her new life here. Feeling presentable enough, Penelope made her way to the cabin's main room. For the first time, she took a proper look at Lucas's home. It was simple but well-crafted, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, open shelves holding dishes and supplies, and a small bookshelf containing perhaps 24 volumes. Everything was clean and orderly, if sparse by Eastern standards. Penelope decided to make herself useful. She found coffee and soon had it brewing on the cast iron stove. She located flour, lard, and a bit of dried fruit, enough to make a simple breakfast. By the time Lucas came in, wiping sweat from his brow, she had a respectable meal waiting. He stopped in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You shouldn't be up doing chores." "I'm feeling much better," Penelope replied, gesturing to the table. "And I wanted to thank you somehow for all you've done. It's just breakfast, but it's more than I usually manage," Lucas said, a smile warming his features. "Usually just coffee and maybe some hardtack if I'm in a hurry." They sat together at the table, an unexpectedly comfortable domesticity settling between them as they ate. Penelope found herself noticing small details about Lucas, the way a lock of dark hair fell across his forehead, the careful way he handled the china cup, as if afraid his strong hands might break it, the tiny scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "I should be able to take you into Redemption Creek in a few days," Lucas said as they finished eating. "Marshall's been by twice looking for leads on the stagecoach robbers. Told him I hadn't seen anything unusual, which was true enough at the time. Next time he comes, you can give him your account." Penelope nodded, her appetite suddenly diminished at the reminder of what awaited her. "Do you think they'll find the men who did it?" Lucas considered, his expression grave. "Territory's big, and men who do such things are good at disappearing, but Marshall Evans is no fool. If there's a trail to follow, he'll find it." "I hope so," Penelope said quietly. "Those people on the stagecoach, they deserve justice." "They do," Lucas agreed. He hesitated, then added, "When you're feeling up to it, I thought you might want to go outside today. Some fresh air would do you good, and it's a fine morning." Penelope brightened at the suggestion. She'd been looking at the prairie through windows for days, eager to experience it properly. "I'd like that very much." After breakfast, Lucas offered his arm for support, and they walked slowly out to the porch. Penelope breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the clean prairie air. From this vantage point, she could see the full extent of Lucas's homestead, the sturdy barn and corral, the chicken coop where half a dozen hens scratched in the dirt, the vegetable garden flourishing behind its protective fence, and beyond all this, the vast wheat fields stretching toward the horizon, golden in the morning sun. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Not what most Eastern folks would call beautiful," Lucas replied. "No grand buildings or manicured parks." "No," Penelope agreed, "but there's a different kind of beauty here, a rawness to it. It feels real." Lucas looked at her with something like appreciation in his eyes. "Most folks who come from cities only see what's missing out here. They don't see what's present." "I'm learning to see differently," Penelope said softly. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. Then Lucas pointed to a spot on the horizon. "That's where I found you, on the eastern edge of the wheat field. You'd come a long way on foot." Penelope followed his gaze, remembering her desperate flight. "I wasn't thinking clearly by then, just knew I had to keep moving or they'd find me." "You've got grit," Lucas said, and there was genuine respect in his voice. "Not everyone would have survived what you did." His words warmed her more than they should have. "I think perhaps I was lucky more than brave. Lucky that you found me. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Penelope felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her recovery and everything to do with the man standing beside her. The moment was broken by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Lucas tensed immediately, his hand moving instinctively to his side where Penelope now noticed a holstered revolver hung from his belt. "Not expecting visitors," he said, his voice suddenly all business. "Stay here." He stepped off the porch, moving to intercept the approaching rider. Penelope watched anxiously as a man on horseback came into view, a silver star visible on his vest even at a distance. "Marshal Evans," Lucas called in greeting, his stance relaxing slightly but not completely. The marshal, a weathered man in his 50s with a salt and pepper mustache, dismounted and shook Lucas's hand. They spoke for a moment, too quietly for Penelope to hear, then both men looked toward the porch where she stood. Lucas beckoned to her. "Penelope, this is Marshal James Evans from Redemption Creek. Marshal, this is Miss Penelope Hart." The marshal removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Miss Hart, heard you were expected in town. School board's been mighty worried since news of the stagecoach robbery reached us." "I would have been there if not for the robbery," Penelope replied. "Mr. Blackwell saved my life." "So he tells me," Evans said, studying her with keen eyes. "Found you collapsed in his wheat field, carried you home on his shoulders. Lucky thing." Penelope felt a flush rise to her cheeks at the image of Lucas carrying her unconscious form. "Very lucky," she agreed. "Miss Hart is the only survivor of the robbery," Lucas explained. "She saw the men who did it." The marshal's expression sharpened. "That's so." "Miss Hart, I hate to trouble you in your recovery, but anything you could tell me about these outlaws would be mighty helpful. Been tracking a gang that's hit 3 stagecoaches in the last month. Witnesses are scarce, as you might imagine." Penelope nodded, a cold feeling settling in her stomach at the thought of reliving that terrible day. "Of course, Marshal, I'll tell you what I can," Lucas gestured toward the house. "Let's go inside. Miss Hart is still recovering her strength." They settled at the table, and Penelope recounted everything she remembered about the robbery, the 4 men who had ambushed the stagecoach, their appearances, the few names she'd overheard during her hiding and subsequent flight. "One of them the leader, I think the others called him Rollins," she concluded. "He was tall, with a scar across his chin, and he wore a black hat with a silver band." Marshal Evans nodded grimly. "That fits with what we know. Blake Rollins and his gang have been terrorizing the territory for months. They're not just thieves, they're killers who enjoy their work." "They're still looking for me," Penelope said quietly. "I heard them say they needed to find the woman in the blue dress." "Which is why no one in town knows she's here," Lucas added firmly. "And why it might be best if it stayed that way until you catch these men, Marshal." Evans tugged at his mustache thoughtfully. "Might be right at that, Blackwell. Redemption Creek's a small town. Word travels fast. If Rollins has spies or sympathizers there, Miss Hart could be in danger." Penelope felt a chill at his words. "But the school board my position. They'll hold it for you," Evans assured her. "I'll speak to them myself, explain the situation without revealing your whereabouts. Say you're recovering somewhere safe after surviving the robbery." "So I'm to stay here?" Penelope asked, looking between the 2 men. "For how long?" "Just until we bring in Rollins and his gang," the marshal said. "Got a posse forming already." "With your description to go on, we've got a better chance now, if that's agreeable to you, of course," Lucas added, looking at her with concern. "I don't mean to keep you here against your will. If you'd rather go to town, we'll figure out a way to keep you safe there." Penelope considered her options. The thought of hiding from killers was terrifying, but the alternative potentially leading them to the children she was meant to teach was unthinkable. "I'll stay," she decided, "if Mr. Blackwell is willing to continue hosting me." "More than willing," Lucas said quickly. "Safer here than in town, I think. Not many folks even know this homestead exists, and those who do have no reason to connect it to the stagecoach robbery." Marshal Evans nodded, satisfied. "That's settled then. I'll ride out again when there's news." He fixed Penelope with a serious look. "You've been brave, Miss Hart. Just a little while longer, and you can start that teaching position without looking over your shoulder." After the marshal departed, Penelope and Lucas stood on the porch watching until he disappeared over the horizon. "I'm imposing on you terribly," Penelope said, breaking the silence. Lucas shook his head. "Not at all. Truth is, it's nice having someone else around." He glanced at her, then quickly away. "Gets lonely out here sometimes." Penelope understood loneliness. Even in Boston, surrounded by people, she'd often felt isolated, especially after Frederick had begun his pursuit, cutting her off from friends who might have noticed his controlling behavior. "Still," she said, "I should earn my keep somehow. I'm feeling stronger every day. There must be ways I can help around the homestead." Lucas seemed about to protest, then reconsidered. "If you're sure you're up to it, I wouldn't mind some help with the chickens and the garden, nothing too strenuous." Penelope smiled, pleased to have a purpose. "I know nothing about chickens, but I'm a quick learner." "That," Lucas said with an answering smile, "I don't doubt at all." The days that followed established a new rhythm to life at the homestead. Penelope took over the cooking and indoor chores, freeing Lucas to focus on the more demanding work of tending the wheat field and livestock. She learned to gather eggs without alarming the hens, to identify weeds among the vegetable plants, to churn butter from the cream of Lucas's 2 milk cows. Each task was new to her, each success a small victory. Lucas proved to be a patient teacher, never laughing at her mistakes but offering guidance when needed and praise when deserved. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in impossible colors, or by the fire if the night was cool, talking about their lives and the worlds they had known. Penelope told Lucas about Boston, about teaching children from wealthy families who sometimes valued their education less than they should. Lucas shared stories of his time in the army, carefully avoiding the worst horrors of war but painting vivid pictures of the places he'd seen and the men he'd served with. "Never thought I'd be a farmer," he admitted one evening as they shelled peas at the table. "My father was a blacksmith. Expected I'd follow him in the trade." "What changed?" Penelope asked, Lucas's hands stilled on the peas. "The war mainly, saw too much destruction, wanted to create instead, grow things, build something lasting." He paused, then added quietly, "And maybe I needed the space, the quiet. After all that noise and death, the prairie seemed like a place where I could breathe again." Penelope understood. She'd come west seeking her own kind of breathing room, away from Frederick's suffocating attention and Boston's rigid social expectations. "Do you miss it?" Lucas asked. "The city, I mean, all those people and buildings and conveniences." Penelope considered the question seriously. "I miss certain things, books primarily. The library in Boston was magnificent, and music, there were concerts and performances, but the rest." She shook her head. "I don't miss the gossip or how everyone knows your business or how limited the expectations for women are." "Limited how?" Lucas seemed genuinely curious. "A proper Boston lady has very few acceptable paths," Penelope explained. "Marriage to a suitable man, of course, teaching if one must work. Perhaps nursing or some charitable endeavor if one comes from wealth, but anything more ambitious is discouraged. When I announced I was taking a position out west, you'd have thought I declared an intention to become a circus performer." Lucas chuckled. "Well, out here, folks care more about what you can do than what you're supposed to do. Known women who run their own ranches, own businesses in town, even practice medicine without proper schooling because they're the only ones with the knowledge." "That's what I hoped," Penelope admitted. "That the West would offer more possibility." "It does," Lucas assured her, "but it takes a certain kind of person to see the possibilities instead of just the hardships." Their eyes met across the table, and Penelope felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Lucas quickly looked away, returning his attention to the peas. "Should have enough for dinner tomorrow," he said, his voice slightly gruff. Penelope nodded, wondering at the sudden tension between them. It had been happening more frequently these past days, moments when their conversation would flow easily, comfortably, and then suddenly shift into something charged with unspoken feelings. She told herself it was natural. They were two unmarried people of appropriate ages living in close proximity. Of course, there would be awkward moments. And when Marshal Evans brought news that Rollins and his gang had been captured, she would go to Redemption Creek as planned and take up her teaching position. This interlude at the homestead would become just a memory. The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. That night, as Penelope lay in bed listening to the prairie wind, she acknowledged a truth she'd been avoiding. She was developing feelings for Lucas Blackwell. Feelings that went beyond gratitude for her rescue or appreciation of his kindness. Feelings that made the prospect of leaving for Redemption Creek increasingly unwelcome. But what did Lucas feel? He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but was that simply his nature? He'd mentioned the girl who couldn't see herself as a farmer's wife. Did that wound still pain him? And even if he did share her feelings, what then? She had a position waiting, a commitment made. Penelope turned restlessly in the bed that still felt like his rather than hers, despite his insistence on continuing to sleep in the barn. There were no easy answers to her questions, and tomorrow would bring no clarity, just another day of domestic tasks shared with a man who was becoming increasingly important to her with each passing sunset. A week passed with no word from Marshal Evans. Penelope's strength returned fully, and she took on more responsibilities around the homestead. She even persuaded Lucas to teach her to ride, using an old, gentle mare named Daisy that was more than happy to plod around the corral with Penelope on her back. "You're a natural," Lucas called as Penelope completed her third circuit of the corral without clutching desperately at the saddle horn. "Hardly," she laughed, but she was pleased with her progress. Growing up in the city, her only experience with horses had been watching them pull carriages. Actually riding one made her feel connected to this place in a new way. "No, really," Lucas insisted, approaching to adjust her grip on the reins. "You've got good balance and you're not afraid. That's half the battle right there." His hands were warm on hers, his body close as he demonstrated the proper way to hold the leather straps. Penelope was acutely aware of him, the clean scent of soap and sunshine that clung to his skin, the strength in his calloused fingers, the way his voice dropped slightly when he spoke near her ear. "Like this?" she asked, adjusting her grip and trying to ignore the racing of her heart. "Perfect," Lucas said, stepping back with what seemed like reluctance. "You'll be ready for a proper ride beyond the corral soon. There's a creek about a mile west of here, pretty spot for a picnic." The invitation hung in the air between them, not quite stated but implied. Penelope smiled, about to accept, when the sound of approaching riders made them both turn toward the road. 3 men on horseback approached, and Penelope felt instant relief when she recognized Marshal Evans in the lead. The other 2 men wore similar badges, deputies, she assumed, or perhaps members of the posse. Lucas helped her dismount, his hand lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary before he moved to greet the lawman. "Marshal," he called, "any news?" Evans dismounted, looking grimmer than when Penelope had last seen him. "Some, Blackwell, but not the kind we hoped for," he nodded to Penelope. "Miss Hart, glad to see you looking well." "You haven't caught them," Penelope guessed, reading the frustration in the marshal's face. "Tracked them as far as the Oklahoma border," Evans confirmed. "Lost the trail in Cimarron country. They're lying low, but my guess is they'll surface again when they need money." Lucas frowned. "So Miss Hart is still in danger." "Afraid so," the marshal agreed. "Which is why I brought reinforcements," he gestured to his companions. "Deputy Wilson and Deputy Carter, they'll be staying in Redemption Creek, keeping an eye out for Rollins or his men. I've got contacts in other towns doing the same." Penelope felt a chill despite the warm day. The outlaws were still free, still potentially looking for her. "What about the school board?" she asked. "My position, they're holding it for you," Evans assured her. "Hired a temporary teacher, old Mrs. Simmons came out of retirement to help, but they're eager to have you when it's safe." Lucas had been silent, his expression thoughtful. Now he spoke up. "What's your recommendation, Marshal? Should Miss Hart continue to stay here, or would she be safer in town with your deputies?" Evans tugged at his mustache. "Hard to say. Town has more eyes watching, but also more people who might talk. Out here, you're isolated, but that works both ways. Hard for trouble to find you, but help is far off if it does." I've thought about that, Lucas said. He glanced at Penelope, then back to the marshal. Been meaning to come to town anyway for supplies. Thought I might bring back a shotgun for Miss Hart. Simple to use, effective at close range. Penelope blinked in surprise. The idea of handling a firearm had never occurred to her, but she realized it made sense in this situation. Not a bad idea, Evans agreed. Every homesteader should know how to handle a gun, man or woman. Never know when you might need to defend yourself or your property. I've never fired a gun, Penelope admitted. I can teach you, Lucas said. Nothing complicated. Just enough to keep you safe if needed. The matter-of-fact way they discussed her potential need to defend herself with deadly force was jarring, a reminder that despite the peaceful days she'd spent at the homestead, danger still lurked beyond its boundaries. The marshal and his deputies stayed only long enough to share a quick meal, updating Lucas on other news from town and the surrounding area. As they prepared to leave, Evans took Penelope aside. "You're in good hands with Blackwell," he told her. "Known him since he settled here 5 years back. Solid man, good judgment. If trouble comes, he'll know what to do." "I trust him," Penelope said simply. Evans nodded, seeming satisfied. "We'll catch Rollins and his gang, just a matter of time. When we do, I'll ride out personally to let you know it's safe to come to town." After the lawman departed, Penelope and Lucas stood on the porch watching the dust settle on the road. "I'm sorry," Lucas said finally. Penelope looked at him in surprise. "For what?" "That you're still stuck here. No, you must be eager to start your real life in Redemption Creek." Something in his phrasing struck Penelope. Her real life, as if this time at the homestead was somehow less real, merely a holding pattern until her actual life could begin. "I don't mind staying longer," she said carefully. "I've learned so much here and I feel safe." Lucas smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in it. "Good, want you to feel safe, and I meant what I said about teaching you to use a shotgun, not to frighten you but as a precaution." Penelope nodded. "I understand, and I'm willing to learn." They fell silent, both looking out at the prairie stretching to the horizon. The weight of unspoken words hung between them, heavier than the summer air. "Lucas," Penelope began, not entirely sure what she meant to say, but feeling the need to break the tension. At the same moment, Lucas said, "Penelope, they both stopped, then laughed awkwardly. "You first," Lucas offered. Penelope gathered her courage. "I just wanted to say that I don't consider my time here as waiting for my real life to begin. These weeks have been real to me. Important." Lucas's expression softened. "They've been important to me too." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "More than I expected." The admission hung between them, opening a door that neither had quite dared approach before. Penelope waited, her heart beating quickly, wondering if Lucas would say more. Instead, he straightened and gestured toward the barn. "Should check on the horses, and if you're serious about learning to use a firearm, we could start with my rifle tomorrow. Shotgun's better for home defense, but the rifle's good for learning basics." The moment had passed, the door not quite closed but not fully opened either. Penelope nodded, hiding her disappointment. "Tomorrow, then." That night, a summer storm rolled across the prairie. Penelope sat by the window watching lightning illuminate the vast landscape in brilliant flashes, counting the seconds until thunder followed. The storm was still distant, but approaching. She thought about Lucas out in the barn. Was he also watching the storm? Was he thinking of her as she was thinking of him? The uncertainty was maddening. In Boston, courtship followed established patterns. A gentleman's intentions were made clear through formal calls, chaperoned outings, perhaps a carefully worded letter seeking permission to court. Here on the frontier, Penelope had no idea what the expectations or customs might be. And Lucas, for all his kindness, remained somewhat reserved, difficult to read. The storm drew closer, thunder rumbling almost immediately after each lightning flash. Rain began to fall, gently at first, then in a sudden downpour that hammered the roof and streamed down the windows. A particularly bright flash and deafening crack made Penelope jump. That strike had been close. She peered anxiously toward the barn, barely visible through the rain-washed darkness. A moment later, the cabin door burst open and Lucas rushed in, soaked to the skin, carrying a lantern. "Lucas, is everything all right?" Penelope asked, rising from her chair. "Lightning hit near the barn," he explained, setting down the lantern and running a hand through his wet hair. "Horses are spooked but unhurt. Thought I'd better check on you too." "I'm fine," Penelope assured him. "Just watching the storm." Lucas nodded, seeming uncertain now that he was here. Water dripped from his clothes onto the wooden floor. "Should get back to the barn," he said, though he made no move to leave. "You're soaked through," Penelope pointed out. "At least dry off and wait until the storm passes." She found a towel and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and Penelope felt that now familiar spark between them. Lucas must have felt it too, because his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Penelope," he said, his voice low but clear even over the rain drumming on the roof. "I need to say something." Penelope's heart quickened. "Yes," Lucas set the towel aside, still dripping but apparently unconcerned with it now. "These past weeks, having you here, it's changed things, changed me." "How so?" Penelope asked softly, made me realize how lonely I was before. "Not just alone, I've been alone for years and managed well enough. But lonely in a way I hadn't let myself acknowledge." Penelope nodded, understanding perfectly. "I know what you mean. Even in Boston, surrounded by people, I often felt isolated." "Yes," Lucas agreed, seeming relieved that she understood. "But with you here, working alongside me, talking in the evenings, it's different, better." He paused, gathering himself. "What I'm trying to say, not very well, is that I've developed feelings for you, strong feelings." There it was, the admission Penelope had both hoped for and feared. Hoped because she shared those feelings, feared because it complicated everything. "I have feelings for you too," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the storm. Lucas's expression transformed, hope and happiness breaking across his features like sunrise. "You do?" Penelope nodded, unable to stop a smile from spreading across her own face. "Yes, I've been struggling with it, to be honest. I came west to teach, made a commitment to the school board. And then there's the danger from Rollins and his men." "I understand," Lucas said quickly. "I'm not asking you to change your plans, just wanted you to know how I feel before." He trailed off. "Before I leave for Redemption Creek," Penelope finished for him. Lucas nodded, his expression growing serious again. "When the marshal brings word that Rollins has been caught, you should go to town as planned. Take the position you came for, but perhaps I could call on you there if you were willing." The proposal was so unexpected yet so perfect that Penelope laughed with relief. "Yes, I would like that very much." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cabin, something new and precious had taken root. Lucas stepped closer slowly, giving Penelope every chance to step away if she wished. She didn't. Instead, she moved toward him, unconcerned with the water still dripping from his clothes. When his hand touched her cheek, Penelope leaned into the contact. When he bent his head toward hers, she rose slightly on her toes to meet him. And when their lips met in a first, tentative kiss, the thunder and lightning outside seemed to echo the feelings surging through her heart. The kiss was brief but tender, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, Lucas smiled down at her with such wonder that Penelope felt tears prick at her eyes. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Not proper to stay." Penelope nodded, though part of her wished he would remain. "The storm's still bad. I'll be fine," Lucas assured her. "Barn's solid. Just wanted to make sure you were all right and to say what needed saying." He kissed her once more, quickly, then retrieved his hat and moved to the door. "Sleep well, Penelope." "You too," she replied, watching as he stepped back into the storm, running toward the barn with his head ducked against the rain. Penelope touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Outside, the storm was beginning to move on, the time between lightning and thunder growing longer again. Inside, her heart was lighter than it had been in months, perhaps years. Whatever came next, whether danger from Rollins or the beginning of her teaching career in Redemption Creek, she would face it knowing that she and Lucas had found something worth holding on to, worth fighting for. Something as vast and promising as the prairie itself. The days that followed brought a new sweetness to life at the homestead. Lucas and Penelope continued their daily tasks, he in the fields and with the livestock, she tending the garden and managing the household, but now there were shared glances, brief touches, moments when work paused for a quick kiss or a shared smile. True to his word, Lucas began teaching Penelope to handle firearms. They started with his Winchester rifle, practicing with targets set up behind the barn. "Keep it snug against your shoulder," Lucas instructed, standing close behind her, his arms guiding hers into the proper position. "That's it. Now take a deep breath, let half of it out and squeeze the trigger gently, don't pull." Penelope followed his instructions, trying to focus on the target rather than the warmth of Lucas's body behind hers. The rifle cracked, the recoil pushing her back slightly against him, and the tin can 20 yards away jumped and fell. "I hit it," she exclaimed, surprised and pleased. "Told you you'd be a natural," Lucas said, pride evident in his voice. "Let's try again." By the end of the week, Penelope could reliably hit targets with both the rifle and the shotgun Lucas had brought back from town. The weapons still made her nervous. She had come west to teach children, not to learn to shoot, but she understood the necessity. The frontier had its own rules, its own requirements for survival. In the evenings, they talked about the future carefully, tentatively, as if speaking too definitively might somehow jinx their happiness. "The school term starts in September," Penelope said one night as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass. "That's only 5 weeks away." Lucas nodded, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. "Marshal Evans thinks they'll catch Rollins before then. Said in his last visit that they've had reports of the gang near the Kansas-Colorado border." "And if they don't?" Penelope asked the question that had been troubling her. "I made a commitment to those children, to the school board." Lucas was quiet for a moment, thinking. "If Rollins isn't caught by then, we'll figure something out. Maybe I could take you to town each morning, bring you back each evening, or perhaps one of the deputies could do it." Penelope smiled at his use of "we," as if her problems were now automatically his as well. It was a new feeling, this partnership, and one she found she liked very much. "What about winter?" she asked. "I've heard winters here can be harsh." "They can," Lucas acknowledged. "Snow, ice, blizzards sometimes. Roads to town might be impassable for days." "So I would need to stay in town during the school term," Penelope concluded. The thought of being separated from Lucas for days or weeks at a time sent a pang through her heart. Lucas squeezed her hand. "We'll figure it out when the time comes. For now, let's just enjoy what we have," Penelope finished for him. He nodded, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her knuckles. "Exactly." The next morning, Penelope woke early before sunrise. The house was quiet, Lucas still out in the barn where he continued to sleep despite their changed relationship. His insistence on propriety touched her, another sign of his respect for her, his concern for her reputation even here where no neighbors were likely to gossip. She dressed quickly and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. Through the window, she could see the first hint of dawn lightening the eastern sky. It would be another hot August day, but for now the air was cool and fresh. As Penelope gathered eggs from the henhouse and milk from the cold cellar where Lucas stored perishables, she found herself humming. For the first time since leaving Boston, perhaps for the first time in years, she felt truly happy. Not just content or satisfied, but genuinely joyful. She was so absorbed in her thoughts and the preparation of breakfast that she didn't immediately notice the sound of approaching horses. When she did hear it, her first thought was that Marshal Evans had returned with news, but the hoofbeats were too numerous for just the marshal and perhaps a deputy. Penelope moved to the window, peering out at the road. What she saw made her blood run cold. 4 riders approached the homestead, dust rising behind their horses. They weren't wearing badges. They were rough-looking men, armed, riding with purpose. Rollins. For a moment, Penelope stood frozen with terror. How had they found her? Had someone in town talked? Had they been tracking her all along? The questions didn't matter now. What mattered was that they were here, and Lucas was in the barn, unaware of the approaching danger. Moving quickly, Penelope grabbed the shotgun Lucas had taught her to use. Her hands trembled as she loaded it, but she forced herself to be calm, to remember the steps he had shown her. The weapon ready, she moved to the door, intending to run to the barn and warn Lucas, but it was too late. The riders had reached the yard, spreading out to surround the homestead. One headed directly for the barn, while two others approached the house. The fourth, a tall man with a distinctive scar across his chin, Rollins himself, remained on horseback in the center of the yard, surveying the scene like a general on a battlefield. Penelope stepped back from the door, mind racing. The shotgun felt heavy in her hands. She could fire, it might hit one of the men approaching the house, but then what? She was outnumbered, and Lucas was still unaware of the danger. A shout from the barn told her that had changed. Lucas had been discovered. Gunshots followed 1, 2, 3 in rapid succession. Penelope's heart seemed to stop. Had Lucas been shot, or had he fired at the outlaw? She had no time to wonder. The front door crashed open, kicked in by a burly man with a wild beard and a revolver in his hand. Behind him came a younger man, thin-faced and nervous-looking but equally armed. "Well, well," said the bearded man, spotting Penelope with the shotgun. "The lady teacher herself. Boss was right, you did survive." "Drop the scattergun, miss," the younger man added. "We ain't here to hurt you if we don't have to." Penelope's mind whirled. If she fired, she might hit one of them, but the other would surely shoot her. If she surrendered, they would take her, or worse. And what about Lucas? Was he already dead in the barn? The decision was made for her when Rollins himself appeared in the doorway behind his men. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice surprisingly cultured for a man with such a brutal reputation. "The woman in the blue dress, you've led us on quite a chase. What do you want?" Penelope demanded, the shotgun still clutched in her hands, though she knew using it now would be suicide. "You saw us," Rollins said simply. "You can identify us, that's inconvenient." He sighed, as if genuinely regretful. "We generally don't harm women, but in this case, I'm afraid necessity dictates otherwise." The cold calculation in his voice terrified Penelope more than rage would have. This man would kill her without passion or hatred, simply because she was an obstacle to be removed. "The farmer's done for," called a voice from outside. The fourth man appeared in the doorway, blood spattered on his shirt. "Put up a fight, but I got him. Lucas, dead." The words hit Penelope like physical blows. She felt something break inside her, a pain so sharp and sudden it took her breath away. In that moment of shock, the bearded man stepped forward and wrenched the shotgun from her hands. Penelope barely noticed, her mind still struggling to process the news of Lucas's death. "Let's get this over with," Rollins said, drawing his revolver. "Nothing personal, Miss Hart, just business." Penelope closed her eyes, an image of Lucas's face smiling, kind, alive, filling her mind. If these were to be her last moments, she wanted him to be her final thought. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the cabin. Penelope flinched, expecting pain, darkness. Instead, she heard a grunt and a heavy thud. Her eyes flew open to see the bearded outlaw collapsing, blood blooming on his chest. In the doorway behind Rollins stood Lucas, wounded but very much alive, his revolver smoking. Then silence, broken only by Penelope's ragged breathing and the ringing in her ears from the gunshots. "Lucas," she cried, scrambling to his side, heedless of the bodies and blood surrounding them. "Lucas, please." He lay still, blood staining his shirt just below his left shoulder. For one terrible moment, Penelope thought he was gone, then his eyelids fluttered and he groaned. "Penelope," he mumbled. "You okay?" Relief flooded her with such intensity that she nearly collapsed beside him. "I'm unhurt," she assured him, quickly examining his wound. The bullet had gone through the fleshy part of his shoulder, painful, but not immediately life-threatening if she could stop the bleeding. "Rollins?" Lucas asked, trying to sit up. Penelope glanced at the outlaw leader. He lay motionless, Lucas's final bullet having found its mark more accurately than Rollins's had. "Dead," she confirmed. "They're all dead." Lucas nodded, grimacing with pain as Penelope helped him to a sitting position. "Thought I was done for in the barn," he said. "Got the drop on me, but his aim was poor. Winged me and thought he'd finish the job." "We need to get you to a doctor," Penelope said, tearing strips from her apron to make a temporary bandage. "Can you ride?" "Have to," Lucas replied grimly. "Need to report this to Marshal Evans." and get you to safety in case there are more of Rollins's men around. With Penelope's help, Lucas managed to stand. Together, they made their way out of the blood-spattered cabin into the clean morning air. The sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the yard where the peaceful routine of their life had been so violently disrupted. "Can you saddle Thunder?" Lucas asked, leaning against the porch post. "Don't think I can manage it one-handed." Penelope nodded, helping him to sit on the porch steps before hurrying to the barn. Inside, she found evidence of the brief gunfight, splintered wood where bullets had struck, a small pool of blood where Lucas had apparently fallen before somehow managing to follow his attacker back to the house. Her hands trembled as she saddled Thunder, but she forced herself to work quickly and carefully. Lucas needed a doctor, and every minute counted. When she led the horse to the porch, she found Lucas pale but alert, the makeshift bandage already soaked with blood. "We'll ride double," he said as she helped him stand. "You in front. I don't trust myself to stay conscious the whole way to town." The journey to Redemption Creek was the longest of Penelope's life. Though it was only 10 miles, it felt like 100 as she guided Thunder along the rutted road, constantly aware of Lucas's labored breathing behind her, his good arm wrapped around her waist to keep himself upright. Twice they had to stop when Lucas nearly fell from the saddle, his strength flagging as blood loss and pain took their toll. Each time Penelope helped him drink from the canteen she'd had the presence of mind to bring, adjusted his bandage, and urged him back onto the horse with desperate encouragements. "Stay with me, Lucas," she pleaded as they neared town, feeling him slump more heavily against her. "We're almost there. Please stay with me." "Always," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Promise." The outskirts of Redemption Creek appeared ahead, a scattering of small homesteads giving way to more closely packed buildings. Penelope had never seen the town before, though she had been meant to make her home here. Now she cared for nothing except finding help for Lucas. "Where's the doctor?" she called to a startled-looking woman sweeping the porch of the first proper building they passed. "End of Main Street," the woman replied, eyes widening at the sight of Lucas's blood-soaked shirt. "The white house with green shutters. Shall I fetch the marshal, please?" Penelope called over her shoulder, already urging Thunder toward the center of town. Their arrival created a stir. People emerged from stores and houses to stare at the blood-spattered woman guiding a horse carrying a half-conscious, wounded man. By the time they reached the doctor's house, a small crowd had gathered. "Help!" Penelope cried as she reined Thunder to a stop. "Please, he's been shot." Two men immediately stepped forward to help Lucas from the horse. Penelope dismounted quickly, staying close to Lucas's side as they carried him into the doctor's house. Dr. Wilson was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and efficient hands. He took one look at Lucas and began issuing orders to his assistant, a matronly woman who moved with practiced precision, gathering supplies and preparing the examination table. "What happened?" the doctor asked Penelope as he cut away Lucas's shirt to better access the wound. In halting sentences, Penelope explained about Rollins and his gang, the attack on the homestead, the gunfight. The doctor listened while he worked, cleaning the wound and examining the extent of the damage. "Bullet went clean through," he announced finally. "Missed anything vital, far as I can tell. Lost a fair amount of blood, but he's strong. With proper care, he should recover fully." Penelope sagged with relief, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was, how close to collapse. "You should sit down, miss," the doctor's assistant said kindly, guiding her to a chair. "You're as white as a sheet." Before Penelope could protest, Marshal Evans burst into the room, his expression a mix of concern and urgency. "Miss Hart, Blackwell, what in tarnation happened?" Penelope explained again, more coherently this time. The marshal's face grew increasingly grim as she described the attack and its aftermath. "4 dead at the homestead, you say?" he confirmed. "Including Blake Rollins himself." Penelope nodded. "Yes, all 4 who came." Evans shook his head, impressed despite the gravity of the situation. "You two took down Rollins and his entire gang, most notorious outlaws in 3 territories. Lucas did most of it. Penelope said, glancing at the now unconscious man as the doctor stitched his wound. I just helped. Shot one with a shotgun from what you described, Evans pointed out. That's more than just helping Miss Hart. Penelope had no response. The reality of what had happened, that she had killed a man, that she had nearly lost Lucas, that the danger that had haunted her since the stagecoach robbery was finally over was beginning to sink in, leaving her numb with shock and exhaustion. We'll need to send men out to the homestead, Evans continued, turning to one of his deputies who had followed him in. Bring back the bodies, confirm it's really Rollins, and someone should stay with Blackwell's livestock until he's well enough to return. The deputy nodded and hurried out. Evans turned back to Penelope, his expression softening. You've been through a terrible ordeal, Miss Hart. Is there someone in town you know, somewhere you can stay? Penelope shook her head. I don't know anyone here. I was supposed to board with a family named Peterson when I took up the teaching position. The Petersons are good folks, Evans said. I'll speak to them about taking you in early, given the circumstances. No, Penelope said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. I want to stay with Lucas, at least until I know he'll be all right. The marshal exchanged a glance with the doctor, who had finished bandaging Lucas's shoulder and was washing his hands. Miss Hart can stay here tonight, Dr. Wilson said. I'll have my wife make up the spare room, Mr. Blackwell shouldn't be moved for at least a day or two anyway, Penelope nodded gratefully. Thank you, doctor. And after that, Evans added, we'll figure things out. The school board will want to meet you. Now that you're finally here, though, I expect they'll understand the need to delay the start of your duties until this situation is fully resolved. The situation. Such a mild term for the violence and terror of the morning. Penelope looked at Lucas, pale but breathing steadily on the examination table, and felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. Whatever happened next, she would not leave his side until he was recovered. I'll stay with him, she repeated, more to herself than to the men in the room, and so she did. For 3 days, Penelope rarely left Lucas's side as he battled fever and pain in the doctor's spare bedroom. She bathed his brow with cool cloths when infection briefly took hold, spooned broth between his lips when he was able to take it, and spoke to him constantly, sometimes reading from books the doctor's wife lent her, sometimes simply talking about her hopes for their future together. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Lucas woke fully lucid for the first time since they'd reached town. Penelope was dozing in the chair beside his bed when his voice, weak but clear, roused her. You're still here. Penelope's eyes flew open to find Lucas watching her, a small smile on his pale face. Of course I am, she said, taking his hand. Where else would I be? Teaching, Lucas suggested, or meeting the school board, or doing anything other than sitting in a sick room with a wounded farmer. Penelope squeezed his hand. The school can wait, you're more important. Lucas's eyes, still shadowed with pain but bright with awareness, searched her face. Am I? Yes, Penelope said simply. You are. He seemed about to say more when the door opened and Dr. Wilson entered, pleased to find his patient awake and alert. Good to see you rejoining us, Mr. Blackwell, the doctor said, approaching to check Lucas's bandages. Miss Hart has been quite the dedicated nurse. So I see, Lucas replied, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face. The doctor's examination confirmed what Penelope had already sensed. Lucas was on the mend, the fever broken, the wound healing cleanly. You're a fortunate man, Mr. Blackwell, Dr. Wilson said as he replaced the bandage. That bullet could easily have struck something vital. As it is, you should regain full use of your arm, though there will be some pain and stiffness for a while. When can I return home? Lucas asked. The doctor considered. Not for at least another week. That wound needs time to heal properly, and the ride would risk tearing the stitches. But if you continue to improve, you could move to the hotel in a day or two, more comfortable than my spare room, and would give my wife back her sewing space. After the doctor left, Lucas turned to Penelope. You should go to the Petersons' house, he said. Start getting to know the town, the people you'll be working with. Penelope shook her head. Not yet. When you're settled at the hotel, perhaps. Lucas studied her, a question in his eyes. Penelope, what are you thinking about the future, your teaching position? I still want to teach, she assured him. It's what I trained for, what I love, but she hesitated, gathering her courage. But I also want to be with you, Lucas. These past weeks at the homestead, even with the danger, even with the uncertainty, they've been the happiest of my life. Lucas's expression softened. Mine too, he admitted, but I can't ask you to give up the position you came all this way for. You're not asking, Penelope pointed out. I'm choosing, and I'm not giving up teaching, just considering how it might work alongside a life with you. If that's what you want to, Lucas's hand tightened on hers. It is more than anything. He shifted slightly, wincing at the pain the movement caused. I had plans, was going to court you properly once you were settled in town, bring flowers when I came to call. Take you for buggy rides on Sundays, do things right. Penelope smiled, touching his cheek gently. We've never done things the conventional way, have we? Met when I collapsed in your wheat field, got to know each other while hiding from outlaws, declared our feelings during a thunderstorm. Why start being conventional now? Lucas chuckled, then grimaced as the movement pulled at his stitches. Fair point. His expression grew serious again. But I want to do right by you, Penelope. You deserve that. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Marshal Evans entered, looking pleased to find Lucas awake. Blackwell, good to see you back among the living, he nodded to Penelope. Miss Hart, hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Marshal, Penelope assured him, though she felt a twinge of frustration at the interruption of such an important conversation. Evans pulled up a chair. Thought you'd want to know we confirmed it was indeed Blake Rollins and 3 of his known associates you dealt with at the homestead. Found wanted posters matching all 4. There's reward money coming your way, quite a substantial amount, actually. Lucas blinked in surprise. Reward money. Rollins had a $5,000 bounty on his head, Evans explained. His men another $1,000 each, that's $8,000 total. Treasury Department's already been notified, should take a few weeks for the paperwork to clear, but the money's as good as yours. Penelope and Lucas exchanged stunned looks. $8,000 was an enormous sum, more than a teacher might earn in 20 years, more than many farmers would see in a lifetime. There's more, Evans continued. News has spread about how you 2 took down the Rollins gang. You're something of local heroes. School boards practically bursting with pride that their new teacher is such a formidable woman, he chuckled. Though I believe they're still hoping you'll teach arithmetic and penmanship rather than marksmanship, Penelope felt herself blush. I still have much to learn about shooting, she demurred. It was mostly luck. And necessity, Lucas added quietly. Evans nodded, understanding in his weathered face. Taking a life is never easy, even when it's justified, but you both did what you had to do. Saved each other and rid the territory of some very dangerous men. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. I'll leave you to rest, Blackwell. Just wanted to deliver the news about the reward money myself. After the marshal left, Penelope and Lucas sat in silence for a moment, processing the unexpected news. $8,000, Lucas said finally, wonderment in his voice. That's life-changing, Penelope finished for him. Lucas nodded slowly. Could do a lot with that kind of money. Improve the homestead, buy more land, more livestock, maybe even build a bigger house. A house with a proper schoolroom, Penelope suggested softly, for children who live too far from town to attend regularly. Lucas looked at her sharply, hope dawning in his eyes. What are you saying? Penelope took a deep breath. I'm saying that perhaps I don't have to choose between teaching and being with you. Perhaps I could do both. The homestead is 10 miles from town, Lucas pointed out. Too far to travel daily, especially in winter. Yes, Penelope agreed. But there are children on outlying homesteads who can't attend the town school for the same reason. What if I taught them? Created a small school at our home? The idea had come to her suddenly, but as she spoke it aloud, it felt right. A way to honor her commitment to teaching while building a life with Lucas. You do that? Lucas asked, his voice thick with emotion. Give up the position in town to teach farm children at the homestead? It wouldn't be giving up, Penelope corrected gently. It would be choosing a different path, one that includes you. Lucas reached for her hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. Penelope Hart, I love you. Have since I carried you home on my shoulders that day in the wheat field, though I didn't know it then. I love you too, Penelope replied, her heart so full it felt it might burst. And I want to build a life with you, Lucas Blackwell, a life that includes both of our dreams. Lucas tugged her hand, drawing her closer until she perched carefully on the edge of the bed beside him. Then marry me, he said simply. Not because of the reward money or the homestead or any practical consideration. Marry me because I love you and want to spend the rest of my life with you. Penelope's vision blurred with tears of happiness. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, Lucas. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise, a promise born in a wheat field and tempered by danger, a promise of a future built together on the vast Kansas prairie. 4 months later, on a crisp December day, Penelope Hart became Penelope Blackwell in a simple ceremony at the church in Redemption Creek. The entire town turned out for the wedding of their heroic schoolteacher and the farmer who had saved her life, though, as Lucas pointed out in his vows, it was Penelope who had ultimately saved him in more ways than one. With the reward money, they had expanded the homestead. A new, larger cabin now stood beside the original, connected by a covered walkway. The new building served as both their home and, during weekdays, a schoolroom for 6 children from neighboring homesteads who had previously received little or no formal education. The town's school board, after initial disappointment at losing their teacher, had come to support Penelope's alternative arrangement. Children who could reach town attended the regular school, while those too distant came to what the locals now called Mrs. Blackwell's Prairie Academy. As winter settled over the Kansas plains, bringing snow that transformed the wheat fields into a shimmering white expanse, Penelope and Lucas built their life together. Each morning, they rose before dawn, sharing chores before the students arrived. Each evening, after the children had gone home, they would sit by the fire planning improvements to both the homestead and the school. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they expressed without words the love that had begun when she collapsed in a wheat field. And he carried her home on his shoulders, a love as enduring as the prairie itself, as boundless as the Kansas sky.